to step through tonight. I will say with the hour, we kind of have about 30 minutes probably for slides, and thinking that it will leave the rest of the time for question and answer. And I guess we're hoping for more of a conversation collaboration. So if you want questions, ask them. We don't need to wait till the end or anything. So I guess with that, I'll kind of step through our slides. Well, I thought I had the clicker. There we go. So kind of the agenda for tonight is going to focus a little bit on a recap. You guys heard from city staff in April about this topic. So we're going to just give a little more background just to refresh everyone's memory, and then talk about the study we did. And we have a couple areas that focused on data collection. We got a lot of information about your inventory, kind of your operations. We will step through the methodology for how we view you have options to do a conversion of the street lighting systems, as well as some of the analytics and number crunching that we did, and finally to give some recommendations from what we learned from doing the study and working with your staff. And I guess real quick, just to recap, we did meet 4 times over the course of the summer and spring with kind of a group, several members of city council and city staff, operations and engineering. So it was a good group to kind of represent all sides of the issue. Really helped us get our hands around the topic and I think get a good understanding of the recommendations from our standpoint. So start with the kind of recap of what you heard in April, and really it's focused on a couple areas. A big piece is you have high voltage street lighting in City of West Allis, which is unique. You're one of a very few communities, Milwaukee is another, that historically built up street lighting infrastructure with high voltage systems instead of low voltage. So it just kind of puts you in a position of having kind of unique needs, and that sets you apart in terms of just a little more challenging than the normal circumstance with bringing infrastructure up to kind of current standards. So just a little bit, your systems are vastly in the high voltage. Only 7% are the parallel circuit or the low voltage type. That you ultimately would be in better position if you were 100% low voltage. And they're run by 23 substations. If you're familiar, they're the large green electrical substations that's kind of buried in the neighborhoods throughout the city, for a total of 76 high voltage circuits that run the lighting throughout the city. This is just a map kind of depicting the high voltage are the pink shaded area. So, generally the whole city or portions of the whole city is run by high voltage street lighting systems. So, the reasons, there are several reasons to think in terms of why the low voltage conversion is a good thing and ultimately your goal. The first of which, safety. Think in terms of your typical systems that run street lighting are 120, 240 volts. The series circuiting that you guys maintain throughout the city is upwards of 4,800, nearly 5,000 volts. So extremely high voltage, and it exposes not just let's say your staff, your operations staff, but the public, contractors working in the city to a very risky situation when it comes to contact with these circuits. Maintenance is unique in that historically to run street lighting high voltage was a great idea because you needed kind of a few substations to run a lot of lights. But let's say if you have one hit, there's a lot of lights can go down as a result. So you kind of have a domino effect if there's issues. So you spend a lot of time finding out where those happen, and a lot of time, materials to fix outages when they do occur. And the same thing when let's say some underground wiring gets hit, it can take out a lot of lights. So the blackouts, you probably are familiar with these failures will take out not just one light, but maybe blocks of lighting. Another big issue is bidding, and when you do have street projects or infrastructure projects that update and upgrade the lighting, it's a very unique. There's not a lot of contractors with the equipment, the expertise, the manpower to work with this type of lighting. So you've had challenges finding adequate contracting forces to actually do the work, just because it's a specialty. And then materials, this is a big one. The cable, the transformers, a lot of the infrastructure that you need to, say, just keep it updated and repaired isn't manufactured anymore. And we've heard that you're kind of fishing for things overseas and outdated equipment that really isn't made anymore, but might be in a stockpile somewhere. So it's very challenging to repair and replace these systems. There we go. So I'll touch a little bit on some of the ideas that came out from April. That ultimately some of these are in our study. We'll talk about more later. So solar was an idea as maybe that would be an option to consider for updating the lighting. In kind of a quick sense, it's more of a isolated lighting is a solution, but it's very costly and it's got a lot of challenges just with the climate and the weather here. Solar is kind of something we didn't take into account with the study. I think you guys heard that early on in April. Just maybe not the right fit for a citywide application. Touch on there's the picture in the lower right is a retrofitting of your existing lights with transformers, and this is something that you could install to just transform that high voltage down to a lower voltage to run, let's say, more modern equivalent lights. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more later in the presentation, but something to be clear on as this is very much something we consider as a component of what you should plan for, but it is not necessarily a long-term fix. This will just be a stopgap measure. And the reason we did take it into account with the study is you're very likely going to have to do some of this, dependent on funding levels and things of that nature, but it's something that you're not really investing in a long-term solution by doing that. So I guess we'll talk more about that later, but just to be clear, that's a little unique in that it doesn't really achieve the ultimate goals. And the next two are contracting with We Energies. We do talk about this with the study. We'll have some more information on the costs and things involved in a little bit. I will admit this is also something that is a little more applicable to new subdivisions, new neighborhoods where the electrical infrastructure that kind of serves the houses is also the same that runs the lights. We're talking about renovating existing neighborhoods, so it's a little bit of an apples and oranges fit with asking the utility to do this, but we do talk about it. And then complete circuit conversions is we have a couple different ways kind of doing it internally versus contracting it out. That's where we're talking about replacing the circuiting and really doing the full upgrade. So I'm going to step away and let Jake kind of talk a little bit of the data collection part of the study and let him go through the next couple slides. I don't know if there are any questions before we jump into the study.
Great. So Mike mentioned a lot of the materials for these high voltage systems are obsolete and can no longer be found or manufactured. The most predominant of these materials is the low pressure sodium luminaires. Your city has over 3,000 of these in use right now, and I believe you found out in February, maybe slightly before that these were no longer going to be manufactured. So in lieu of that, the DPW made an emergency purchase of about 7,000 of these. And we have them, or he has them stockpiled somewhere. But essentially, once these run out, those low pressure sodium bulbs can no longer be fixed or replaced. These bulbs have a typical 3-year lifespan, so about 1,000 or so go out per year and need to be replaced. Therefore, after about 7 years, you will start to go completely dark, and after 10 years, all of these low pressure sodiums will be unusable. So obviously, something needs to be done here. This would be the most dire need for this street lighting conversion. We took into account the 7,000 that's in backstock compared to the 3,000 or so that are in operation, and we figured that we need to convert approximately 225 of these per year in order to keep pace with our backstock. This pace is a minimum pace. It doesn't really take into account any sort of premature failures that might occur any breakages that might happen in storage, you know, any unforeseen circumstances with the type of bulbs, because there is 35 watt and 55 watt, so there's sort of a balancing act we have to do there. So this 225 is the minimum bar that we set, but anything we can do above that obviously is what we're shooting for.
I guess real quick, just this is a very important thing in terms of it sets the time frame for really the whole study, that this is you bought the last ones that exist, so there aren't any more. If they run out or you use them faster than maybe what we project or your normal rate, there is no replacement. You're going to spend, that's where those transformers came into play, that you're going to have to start doing those, which are stopgap kind of measures.
Just a quick question. You're saying you're going to replace 225 per year. Once you replace those 225, that's 225 more bulbs that come into the stockpile, correct? Is that considered into the number?
That is assuming that those 225 that get replaced are at the end of their lifespan.
At
and
the
are no
beginning of their
longer-
lifespan. Well, your assumption is that they're at the end.
We're replacing them at the end of their lifespan.
But we still would have those left
Yeah, and they
over
might have a
if they had
year.
a year left on
Yeah,
them,
they might
6
have a year
months
left on
them. We could prolong that 10-year darkness thing to maybe 12 or 14.
Yeah, you can buy yourself a little bit
Little
of
time,
time.
okay.
The exact numbers on those are kind of difficult to
Guesstimate.
assess right now. So for all intents and purposes here, we
Okay.
did leave that part out. But
I guess I would also caution that it's a little probably cumbersome to try to save lamps and keep the old ones that might have a year left. And we didn't really at all kind of factor in salvage of anything that's out there
Right.
now.
When a lamp reaches the end of its lifespan, does it just fail, or are we're rotating them out automatically?
so these we actually rotate out automatically every 3 years because they start to go dim.
get
and
dimmer.
They actually stress the system more.
Okay. They draw
So,
more.
Yeah. Yep.
And I guess the last piece here is, you know, as these lamps kind of go in that 3-year cycle, that was how we established priorities. So kind of knowing which systems would be at that year 3, those are the ones we kind of projected. Those would be the ones you update first, and to kind of just follow with the replacement of, you know, the next 3-year cycle would then be kind of 3 years down the line with a priority list.
So you have a map showing where you think are, later on, you're gonna come to a map saying, do these first, do this first?
We don't have a map, but we have a general idea of the order that we want to proceed. Yeah. So I guess for the purposes of this study, we're using 13 years as kind of the benchmark to get everything converted. Once you get down to like year 14 and 15, you're talking 4 or 5 luminaires, and technically that's all going to be covered by a circuit, so it's kind of negated. So 13 years is essentially the benchmark that we're using here to get these low pressure sodium luminaires converted. So by doing 225 per year, we do need to get rid of about 47% of all the luminaires that are in operation. We felt the first part of data collection obviously is to provide an inventory of what the city has for lights. So 47% being those high voltage, low pressure sodium luminaires. Those are our priority number 1. 30% of the luminaires are high voltage, high pressure sodium, which some of these kind of are on the same, some of them share circuits with low pressure. So you have some circuits that have both LPS, low pressure sodium, or high HPS, high pressure sodium. But then you also have some high voltage circuits that only have high pressure luminaires. So our second priority, once we get rid of the low pressure, would be to get rid of the remaining high pressure. So as I mentioned, that 13-year being our benchmark, we kind of split this project up into a couple different time frames. The first time frame was that first slide, the existing. This would be after we get rid of all of the circuits that have low pressure sodium luminaires. We estimate that we'd be about 70% LED low voltage, with 20% of the system remaining being that high voltage, high pressure sodium. And then obviously the ultimate goal would be 100% low voltage LED. So that is the final time benchmark, and that's approximately 19 years at the pace that we're kind of indicating here.
And I guess just to reiterate too, because it's a little bit, there are 2 things that are really at play. It's you're running out of low pressure sodium, they don't make them anymore, and then you're also dealing with high voltage circuiting that has both types. We understand high pressure sodium, let's say a couple years from now, they're probably going to tell you the same thing, that we're going to stop making those as well. they aren't there yet. That's a little more of a historically prevalent technology. So you've got more time, but the reality is that's going to go out just like low pressure sodium recently has.
So the second portion of our data collection effort was to look at the energy being used and what the potential savings are there. The existing energy calculations that we came up with using just a per wattage per luminaire basis, just under 400,000 annually. We assume, or we estimate that, I don't know if there's a pointer on here, but the black line that's just over 300,000, everything above that is heat loss waste from ballast and inefficiencies in the old luminaires and the old products. So the kind of odd thing here is that after we convert all of these low pressure sodium circuits to LED, we're actually going to see a jump in energy. And that's because these low pressure sodiums do use less wattage. That was the whole purpose of installing these in the first place, is because they're low wattage. So that first 13-year benchmark, there will be a slight uptick in energy usage. But we anticipate that upon full conversion to LED, getting rid of all of that waste energy, we should see an ultimate decrease in energy at the end of this entire project. And then we also looked at the maintenance being spent on just maintaining and operating these systems. We did a P3 study for Milwaukee a couple years back, a public-private partnership where they looked at possibly putting all their lights into a private entity instead of their own. And we got a lot of numbers during that study to kind of correlate the cost of a high-pressure sodium light versus a LED light. Unfortunately, those were all low voltage. They did not have any high voltage, let alone low-pressure sodium. But we were able to kind of back calculate a lot of that information and estimate that you're spending a little over $200,000 right now annually on just maintaining the street lighting out there. Again, we should see extremely large decreases in that as we get rid of the high voltage systems because, as Mike mentioned before, they're costly, they're hard to maintain, there's no materials out there to purchase. And then ultimately, on full conversion to LED, you'll see essentially minimal amount spent on maintaining the street lighting system. So it just kind of exacerbates the fact that doing this project will save money in the long run. To kind of put those numbers into context, we took the energy spent and the maintenance spent, divided over the amount of households in West Allis, and kind of came up with a per person or per taxpayer, if you want, cost. So right now we would estimate maybe $20 a household. And just to kind of show that savings at the end of this project, we should be closer to 12. So it's cutting it almost in half. It's a substantial number to decrease. Finally, we looked at the different rebate opportunities that are available for this project. The only real option that we found at this point in time, at least, that was available is through Focus on Energy. And they do provide incentives for replacing street lighting with LED. That is based on the amount of light that is put out by each light or by each luminaire. And we figure using that metric, there's almost $250,000 on the table for rebate incentives with this project. I'll touch back on that retrofit with the little transformers that we kind of mentioned. There is no real incentive for replacing those. There is Focus on Energy offers what's called a mogul screw base, rebate opportunity where it's per wattage replaced, but since we're going from low pressure sodium to LED, low pressure sodium being a lower wattage, we actually don't see any savings that way. So the only real savings is through a full conversion of the street lighting system.
Question on that?
Yeah.
Is that per year or over the?
It's a one-time. That would be at the end. And I did speak with the representative from Focus on Energy, and we can lock in these rates if we know that we're going to have projects going for a long time. So if they do decide to change these and lower the amount back, we can have it locked in for 10 years, 13 years, and make sure that we're getting the amount of money back that we.
And if they increase the rates in the future, we'd be eligible for the new higher rate?
I would hope so. I would hope so.
I think they will bank kind of an amount of money in the program for you guys Because there's been years where the program's kind of gone, that doesn't get funded by the state. So it's, if you commit to a long-term, say, plan, they will say, well, we'll hold $250,000 to pay that off year over year and not give that out to other communities, other rebate opportunities.
So I guess that's kind of the extent of our data collection in a nutshell. If there's any questions at this point with those numbers, we'll move on to the different construction methodologies.
I can grab that. Any thoughts? So I guess when it comes to construction methodology to do the upgrades that we've been talking about, there's essentially three ways we looked at it. There's doing it internally with city forces. There's contracting it out to, producing plans and sending them out to bid and having contractors do the work. And then there's doing kind of a negotiation with We Energies, and similar to having a contractor do it, you'd ask them to do it. So those are the three primary ways we looked at. Just to start a little bit, we learned a lot about how currently your city forces operate. You've got about 11 total staff dedicated to just electrical operations and maintenance. Things like traffic signals, street lighting, city facilities, electrical facilities, basically overseeing and maintaining those. The primary duties are just routine maintenance, knock down poles, replacing things when they burn out, just basic stuff like that, and supporting your annual capital improvement projects that you do every year. So there's work put into that. So from an equipment standpoint, there's a boring rig that was recently purchased. That's actually been working towards a couple projects that are these street lighting conversions that we've been talking about, and a hydrovac truck to do utility excavating, just for they kind of work together. That in some ways are shared with other departments, but their resources available currently. I mentioned, so there's a couple projects currently going on, circuits F1 and A3. One is just a couple blocks away, but these are the type of projects that we're talking about. So they're complete replacement of the infrastructure, going from high voltage to low voltage, and getting rid of the outdated high pressure, low pressure sodium in lieu of putting in LED. So right now those are being handled kind of using your forces. What that means, though, is that's kind of taking them away from the routine maintenance, and while it's working and they're doing it, it does kind of just divert the attention, plus it shares the attention, so they're maybe less productive than they could be if they were solely dedicated on that type of work, because they're bouncing kind of back and forth. So when we talk about having internal forces do the work, in the long run, this is talking about adding more capacity and dedicated staff. The way we've learned, just by kind of understanding the nature of the type of work, the magnitude of the projects, we kind of forecast 6 to 8 dedicated positions would have to be put on this to get that 225 per year rate, year over year over year. And that would be, like I said, dedicated to the circuit conversions, separate from the routine operations. It may mean additional boring rig and hydrovac trucks just to keep pace, because that's, the way we looked at it is maybe 4 different projects to get 225 per year, because they're circuits that you're going to take on individually. So if you take on one, you're taking on the whole thing. And average to get 225 is like 4 different projects. You might be in 4 different places all at once, and that equipment is hard to share in that fashion. So you might need more equipment, and like I said, that will leave existing staff to kind of focus on the routine maintenance, your capital improvement projects, and other things of that nature. We talked a lot in our meetings kind of leading up to this, that it's not that simple to kind of say we'll grab 6 to 8 qualified electricians. We understand there's been some challenges hiring people with some open positions currently, and there's a very competitive job market right now. So private sector is luring people with competitive pay, and just there's a lot of demand for electricians and electrical construction forces right now.
So may I ask you, Mr. Chair, if, per se, I mean, you mentioned about get out 3 bids out there, whatever, through a private entity, what would be the, the estimate cost if the city we hire within? And I said there is some problem with electrical, getting electricians, What would be the difference, say if we hire additional, say, 4 or 5 electricians, and we hire, say, a private contractor? To me, I mean, a contractor in the long range, or even in the long, annually, I'm sure he will, the price we're gonna be, even, like I said, by hire 5 additional employees, I mean, you gotta pay benefits and everything else, but if you hire a private contractor, I wonder what the cost would be. Maybe it could be.
We have a ton of, we got some,
I mean,
We'll
we're
get there.
not
no,
to
and
that.
and we
We're
got,
not to that yet.
no, we have all, we'll have
there. It's
several bar graphs that will
It's
will
coming.
do
Yeah, I know it's
that.
coming. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm just saying that.
And I don't know, I mean, in a proportional sense, roughly, it's up 30%, is that fair? Basically increase of the way we looked at it. Contractors are more expensive, there's things you're paying for. That way, that doing it internally is more cost effective. We will talk about that, but there's a kind of a defined markup to have contractors do this work.
Yeah, I know we're not that far yet, but just the idea.
Yep.
I'd like to throw it out there.
We will step into that here shortly. I guess in basics, just the concept of if you do this in-house, that kind of assumes you're doing all the work. Let's say the conduit placement, pulling wires, pouring concrete bases, putting up poles, the whole thing is done in-house. It's dependent on the ability to hire and maintain that dedicated workforce. It would assume you're gonna couple these dedicated, say, electricians to your road improvement project. So if you're gonna build a road, you're gonna have your guys go and do the streetlights at the same time. And just a kind of reiteration of if you don't keep pace with 225, then you're gonna have some of those folks out doing those retrofits. So you're gonna put the time in one way or the other. So by contrast, if we're talking about how does it work if you hire that work out and put plans out to bid, assumes kind of the opposite. Everything is outsourced. You have bid contractors doing that work. You're, in that sense, the way we calculate, you don't have any new city staff factored in. You're able to cover that with existing forces. You would likely see some degree of flexibility to have one contractor here, a different contractor here, and hypothetically you could cover more bases maybe in the same amount of time. We'll talk a little bit more about the challenges related to that, but that is maybe a more flexible route potentially. However, similar to the challenges you've seen hiring electricians, you've had challenges getting contractors to bid on these projects. So it's not a guarantee either way. And some of that has to do with just the uniqueness of high voltage lighting is not something everybody's kind of chomping at the bit to go and work on for you. So, and again, if let's say you do contract it out, but it's at let's say a budget level less than 225 per year, you still have to have your staff out doing those retrofits. So there's a real balance of how much you can do. Whatever way you do it, you may have kind of some work put at those retrofits. And then kind of lastly, we talked about We Energies, instead of contractors doing it, having We Energies, which in all reality, they have contractors doing it, and you're just kind of, in some ways, hiring a middleman. And the result of that is you're just kind of paying more to contract it out with a third party involved doing it for you. Again, that doesn't really require more city staff for the city to oversee We Energies contractor to do the work. But it will mean a couple different things, that as We Energies would do this, they will take over the long-term maintenance. So if they go and rebuild the circuit, well, that's not yours to maintain anymore. So piece by piece, you're kind of lowering your general obligation to maintain that lighting as they convert the systems. I would say we have kind of some measures of caution that cost controls and priorities with We Energies doing this is a little bit of a challenge. So you're at their kind of whim. If they got other things they'd rather do, I think it's going to be a hard sell to make them do it. Unlike if you hired a contractor, they're kind of answering to you. We Energies may not be that way. And again, if We Energies doesn't get 225 per year, you're going to be out with city forces doing those retrofits. That's kind of a quick recap of the different methodologies. I don't know if any questions on that. I'll turn it back over to Jake to talk some more numbers. Yep.
So we were able to place numbers on those 3 different methodologies that Mike just talked about. These would be capital construction costs only, so materials and construction removals. As you can see, the city forces is substantially less expensive than contractor forces or We Energies. The cost for city forces, okay. So this would be the cost of a average circuit. So a typical circuit out on the city of West Allis streets, not per luminaire, I apologize for that, but either way.
Okay, good.
So an average circuit being around 80 lights, you're gonna have to do so many of those to complete your 225 per year, the minimum.
How did you calculate using city forces?
So city forces was
we're paying them all year long and they'd only be doing this when the weather is good.
correct. So
Did you figure that in?
yep, city forces was actually calculated based on these recent conversions, the F1 and the A3 circuits. So we have the numbers of what it actually costs the city to do this job, and we
But
can.
I'm talking about if you hire 6 or 8 more people, you're gonna have those on the staff all 12 months of the year and be paying them benefits, and they're not gonna be doing this all
Correct,
12
but
months.
that cost does not go into the capital cost of construction and materials. That is actually a labor cost that is on the next slide.
We're gonna
Okay,
try
so
and
it's
see
not a-
how much of the winter we can do stuff though, that's what I'm hearing, so.
Yeah. So the city forces was based on these costs that just came out with the F1 and the A3 circuits. The contractor forces were a combination of the bids received for those circuits that were actually decided not to go with at the time, plus our own engineering estimates. We kind of averaged those out. And then the We Energies estimate is just essentially a markup of that because they will be middlemaning the procurement of all the materials and the procurement of a contractor. So they need to make money too. So here's the labor cost that we estimated for a single circuit conversion. With city forces, we estimate that performing one circuit conversion will still be substantially less than having a contractor do it versus having We Energies do it. There will still be some city labor cost associated with having a contractor and We Energies do it, a circuit conversion, because they do need to oversee construction. However, it's obviously substantially less than having 6 to 8 guys out working on the street lighting. The contractor labor was simply pulled from the contractor estimates. Typically, a contractor will include that labor in their construction cost estimate, which is where things get a little hairy trying to compare city force labor to contractor force labor. But if we were to pull out those numbers and just kind of generalize using, a couple engineering estimates, I suppose you could call them, we still find that it's a cheaper labor cost overall to use city forces.
Mr. Chair. Jake, this is again labor cost per luminaire on this
Correct,
one.
yep, same.
The other one was, but still the scale would be the same.
The scale is
Just
still the
multiply that by
same,
80,
correct.
it would still be at the
Correct.
same
I
circle
apologize
scale.
for that confusion there. And then, so just to reiterate, the minimum pace that we need to perform these conversions is 225 luminaires per year. We assume that will take about 13 years to convert all luminaires. So, using that 13 years as our first priority, we estimate annually that the city will pay approximately 1.8 million. That's including construction cost and city labor cost, subtracting out maintenance savings, energy savings, and focus on energy rebates. Likewise, if you were to hire out all of this work for a contractor, you're looking at maybe 2.5 million. We Energies, you're looking at almost 3 million. So this is annual cost to do 225 low pressure sodium luminaire conversions per year. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're converting 225 lights. You're probably converting 300 lights, but we need to do 225 low pressure sodium lights. So all the other lights are incidental. And like I said, again, the construction cost for a contractor and for We Energies is included in the construction cost because that is how they operate compared to how city funds would operate. This would be the second priority after low pressure sodium luminaires are removed from the system, so that 13 to 19 year benchmark, same ratios, exact same calculations, just slightly smaller circuits. If we extrapolate that data over the 19 years, we can see a compounded cost for how much the city will eventually pay with inflation included. And we're looking at, by the end of this project, the purple line being city forces only, we're looking at on the edge of $20 million in savings, $25 million in savings, compared to having a contractor do all the work. And then I think We Energies kind of excludes itself at this point in time, just based on the giant gap in overall spending. These are those same numbers, just with a value put to them. The main takeaway here would be that with We Energies, you no longer have energy maintenance fees because you're giving them the lights, but you do have an annual fee that you will pay, and that annual fee actually ends up being more than you're currently paying to operate these lights and to maintain these lights. And not only is that your compounded fee after 19 years, but that fee will keep going for the next 300 years, 400 years, whatever it is.
I'll be around by then, you know.
Someone else's problem, right?
But the idea, I think that's,
It's about 42 million, 58 million, and 72 million about?
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah, this one it might be a little easier to estimate. 42, 58, yeah, like you said, 72.
Did you include the cost of purchasing other equipment included in this?
That is not included because we're not totally sure what all needs to be purchased at this point in time. So again, this is sort of everything rounded up. Years until priority one completion, it's the same for all. We need to keep that minimum pace. I think at 13 years is the low end. We estimate an annual budget that the city would need to budget for between 1.3 and $3 million. And that's, again, capital cost of construction. At the end of this entire 19-year process, the capital cost for construction would be that final column, 30 million, 46 million. So you can see the large difference in using city forces and the benefits to using city forces over the other two methodologies.
I guess real quick, Jake, this does apply inflation kind of year over year?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Inflation is applied for each year.
Jake, to verify, a couple slides ago, it showed I thought it showed 1.8 million for city staff for the LPS conversion.
Which, this slide?
One more.
Correct. That is,
Oh, it is one. One more. 1.8 million.
yes.
That has labor,
That has labor included, yes.
so the last column is just capital
The last
costs.
column is just capital, so that blue.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's just the conduits, wires, kind of the physical construction elements to it.
The way we understand this to work is that the capital cost would come out of essentially one pocket and the labor cost would come out of another pocket.
Got it.
So, again, that's kind of the hairy part where you're, comparing city force labor to construction labor isn't exactly apples to apples all the time.
so basically with We Energy, really, just like you buy, have to have an insurance policy, you know what it is. Just like when you buy a stove or a refrigerator, they say you can buy for 2-3 years. It costs you, say, $150, To me, I'd like to stay away from We Energy, really.
Right.
They're gonna rip us off.
Right.
really.
Well, I suppose my
I
philosophy
use
is
that terminology,
Yeah.
really. They're gonna rip the city right off.
right. My philosophy is that We Energies will not lose this battle. They're
Well, of
going to
course
come
they're
out on
gonna
top
lose.
somehow.
But kind of like I said before, We Energies is a good fit if you hadn't built anything at all and they're out there trenching in cables
Oh,
for other
yeah.
reasons, then, then it's a little more of a benefit to go with them, and that's why a lot of new subdivisions and kind of newer communities would do that.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Weigel.
on these potential new city employees, would they all have to be licensed electricians, or could they work them in teams where there's one electrician overseeing laborer, or type
That's,
jobs.
I
And you
think that's exactly right. Maybe
built that into the pricing, so it's not like we're hiring 6 to 8 they're not all electricians.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. There's a certain positions need to be electricians, certain positions do not. They all need to be dedicated to street lighting conversion.
And they'd probably get real good at it after a while.
That's the idea. Hopefully they
faster.
can get faster.
And
That's
that's,
the
I
idea.
think the experience from this year has shown that to be the case. That the kind of pace has picked up just even in year one, so.
I mean, hypothetically, the engineer doing the design plans should probably be an electrical engineer, but all the rest could probably be technicians, right? Putting up the poles, pouring the bases, pulling wire.
I believe whoever is installing electrical services needs to be licensed.
Okay.
Definitely like connecting to breaker panels.
That part.
Connecting.
All that,
But not to
so
pull
you
the
def-
wire or anything.
But to bore conduit, to hydrovac utilities, there's a lot of
Labor.
labor level stuff that would not require a licensed electricians.
And you took that into consideration in pricing.
The
Yes.
price, well, there's
Employee.
each employee is considered to have the same cost we did include benefits, top salary, so capped out salary, and holiday time. So the idea was that hopefully our estimate's a little high, but we also wanted to make sure that we're not shortchanging anyone and that it doesn't come in surprising anybody. As we do figure out what people can be hired and what positions can be filled, we can obviously hone in on that number a lot better. But for now, it's kind of outside looking in, just, you need 6 guys, 8 guys, 10 guys, however many you can get, you know?
What's the season they work? They can work March to December, maybe?
Depends what kind of winter we get, but ideally they can work almost year round.
Experiment with
And what would they be doing when they're not working? In other words, we have rainy days, they can't go out.
Sorting light
We
bulbs.
have winter where
Sorting
maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks, they can't, are we gonna lay them off?
Mr. Chair, if I could, they could probably do some revamping, help with snow plowing, maybe building maintenance facilities, you know, for a certain period of time. But there is street.
Dave, I'll be honest, that sounds like make work projects to find stuff for guys to keep them busy.
Well, we still have to do.
And that's not our intention here. Our intention is to get this done, period, and not have them make other stuff. We're not looking to fill other positions, we're looking just to get this done. And, you know, I would say, if they're gonna be off for 6 weeks in the winter, you lay them off for 6 weeks then. That's the way it is. That's the way it is in the construction industry. I mean, all these contractors lay their employees off. If it's a rainy day and they can't work, they don't work, they don't get paid. It's the way it is. So if you're gonna be acting like a contractor, you gotta treat the guys like contractors.
I would say that's definitely a real component of this conversation. It was a little hard to capture that in
Yeah, I know.
kind of the analytics we did, but that's definitely something we've talked a lot about is downtime, so.
Yeah.
I'll, just to make sure we have some time left over, but, so just a real quick kind of recap, I think we talked about basically everything, but kind of the conclusions that what we figured out by working with your staff and looking into the numbers is, you know, we gotta hit the LPS, the low pressure sodium, they're the highest priority, clearly, and then secondarily, you'll go on to the high pressure sodium, so there's a couple clear, objectives in that. We'll set the time frame and we'll kind of balance your priorities. We definitely know with inflation and kind of getting the benefit of lower maintenance and energy that the faster you do it, the more you save in the long run. So if you exceed that 225 pace, you save money in the long run. So city forces, I think, as just a kind of basic calculation, are clearly the lowest cost, but hiring challenges are real. Keeping that rate of progress, just like we were talking about staffing consideration and consistent budgeting. So let's say you miss a year where you can't fund the street lighting projects, then what do you do? So that's something you guys grapple with at all times. So contractor forces are more expendable, but they're going to cost you more. So we energies, we definitely feel like it's not a great fit and don't necessarily view that as a viable option. I would say we're pretty confident that you're looking at a blend of doing some with contractor and some with city forces as the right approach, at least to begin with. And you can look at, kind of take a look in future years, let's say after your low pressure sodium are done, you take stock, maybe there's a different balance of priorities, a new timeline. But to kind of make adjustments in the future, maybe you are beating the 225 per year, or you're falling short, but at least right now we view that as the benchmark. And this is kind of give you a picture of, if you blend contractor and city forces, so we've got, you know, the 225 per year in a all contractor on the left, and an all city on the right, and kind of a 1 to 3, 2 to 1, 3 to 1 ratio. So you can kind of see, and not surprisingly, it just is a pretty linear scale. You're paying more for some things and less for others, and that proportion just changes depending on who's doing the work. And this is that same kind of full, full conversion time frame with all those proportions. So the top being all contractors, you pay the most, the bottom being city forces, and that ratio of different, different amounts by different entities is just going to cost you a little bit more, a little bit less in the long run. This is a graph to show what that first 13 years might look like from an annual capital budget standpoint. So we show kind of in year one, 2019, you put in 600,000 was the number to get to that 225 per year pace, but also factoring in the actual systems you have and your actual priorities. You can see that green line is close to that 1.3 million. But year by year, it goes up, it goes down, because you're taking on bigger systems, smaller systems, and they do fluctuate. So it won't be the same every year, but it averages at that 1.3 number.
Correct. And to reiterate, this is assuming city forces at all projects.
Yes.
This graph is.
This is only for if
Correct.
you do it internally.
And these numbers do represent a real budget plan, real circuits. This will get the job done. There's a lot sort of moving around that we'll need to do, but just as a starting point, this would, for example, complete the projects and complete the job in the 13-year time frame without running out of bulbs. And the ultimate goal is to not go dark, so this would achieve that goal.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
There's more.
I can back up.
It's just this is the last slide.
Yeah, so I don't know if you had questions here?
No.
Okay, sorry. So, the budget recommendation, maybe if we're to say what's the stable way to kind of fund this, is probably somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million annually, because that's that fluctuation, is you're in that range. And you want to take on the low pressure sodium and get the biggest circuits done first, just so you have less pressure to keep pace with that. So you'll find it less and less urgent over time if you take that approach, and then take another look after you're almost done with those low pressure sodium to figure out, well, where are we at with high pressure sodium. You're going to want to have that same balance over time. Take on the biggest ones, get those done soonest, and then ultimately the whole city is converted, not just with the high voltage circuits, but with a more energy efficient and maintenance friendly LED lighting, or maybe in 10 years we're talking about some new lighting technology that
Stop it.
runs on optimism. Who knows? So
Optimism.
so
Flux capacitor.
Yeah.
to very quickly kind of those retrofits. So just to remind you, if you don't maintain that 225 kind of pace, this is what you're going to put money into, and this still costs money, and it takes labor, and it takes. If we were to say retrofit the whole city, that's in the neighborhood of $2 million of kind of throwaway investment. So it's a big number. It probably is a factor you're going to have to work with, just knowing that things will come up where maybe if you commit to it, and there's going to be a year where you can't do as much as you'd like, so you're going to be out doing some of these just to keep the lights on. There we go. So that's our presentation. There's a lot more in the numbers, and I guess we're able to kind of provide more detail, but hopefully that helped clarify. If there are questions, let us know.
Mr. Chair. What I wanted to mention is, even if we kept these staff, and I agree with you, if there's a downtime, we might have to assign them to other things, or to lay them off for a while. It's still cheaper to do city staff. And then my next question would actually be for Dave. You know, we talk about construction methods. Is it possible during the summer to have them do nothing but pour bases and set conduit and pull wire, and then come when it gets colder in December, but maybe the snow's not as bad, have them, that's when you have them set up the poles, and that's when you have them wire up the luminaires, and you know, it might be a construction method where in the summer we're gonna do nothing but lay wire and the underground, and in the winter we're gonna do above ground work. That may be a possibility. You might even be able to do more than 4 circuits that way a year.
I think that's definitely a strategy that, you know, just to balance your workforce on things that are easier to do when the weather's nice, and give yourself an opportunity to do things that are at least above the frozen ground level. And I think the only maybe consideration
Snow
is,
piles?
well, you're not gonna have lights in those neighborhoods until the end of winter because you haven't put up any light poles. So I think
Oh,
that's
so you can't
something to
keep,
think
you
about.
can't keep the existing network fired up while you're working on the
That's-
second?
That's,
very,
Tricky?
That's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
You'd also be restricted by boring capabilities and speeds of the boring rig.
Okay.
If you're
So
only,
you'd lengthen the time that a neighborhood would be dark by doing
I think it's probably pretty safe to say you're gonna have to go without light because, you know, those circuits are in the terrace and those, you know, old bases, new bases are all kind of coexisting. It's probably possible in some cases, but it's gonna be challenging to keep the old in every case, unless you've got them on one side and you put the new on the other side.
That's my other.
You know, there's gonna be cases where that works and there's gonna be cases where that may not work.
But maybe there's something that could be done to help.
correct.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Vitale.
I would like to say that by talking about 13 years, it could be more than 13 years, the way I look at it, by subcontracting all this project, the way I see it is gonna cost the city a lot more money. I mean, that's my completely thought, you know. I believe if we're doing housing, but hires some people to follow through that, I mean, I'd like to repeat that again, I think it'd be more costly effective, really. We're not talking 2 years, like we do on road constructions, which it takes 3 months, 4 months to do it, which we have problems sometimes with the contractors, you know? I mean, they don't finish at the deadline, you know? We have to extend probably for another month or 2 months, maybe sometime a year, like a National Avenue, the same thing. So to me, I think, but just to have our own people doing that, I think it's more effective, because, you know, we're not talking about 2 years project, we're talking about more than 13 years here, you know? So to me, so something gonna be digested, and I think talk over more, I mean, to make sure that we do the right thing, really, because it's not cheap, you know?
I'm looking at it and thinking that the approach we should take is the blended approach and hire a contractor initially to do some and have the city crews do some and see what kind of bids we get, see what kind of work they do, how fast they get it done in comparison to our city people. And we do it like that for the first year or two to get a feel for what it's gonna cost and how it's gonna go. And if we find out that the city crews are putting them in as fast and as well and less expensively, we can do future projects and completely with the city. If we find out we're not keeping up, and I'm afraid that we're not gonna be able to keep up with city crews to get it done in 13 years, because we've had trouble hiring people and keeping people, and I think we ought to at least start with contractors working both ways to see how that's gonna work. And if we can build up the staff and get confidence that they're gonna be able to get it done, that's fine. But I think initially, we can't fool around with this, and we better do it both ways.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman Weigel.
I'm gonna agree with what the chair says. I think we should start with both. I'm also gonna remind people that although right now, we're like in a full employment economy, I think it's,
Yeah,
you know,
and it can change.
2 jobs for every guy out there looking for a job right now. And that will change. In the time frame of this program, that will change. There will be a time when the bids are gonna come in really low, because when the contractors are looking for work. So I think a hybrid approach, and it can vary over time. What we decide, what this council decides to do this year could change in 2 years. We could hit a recession, it could be contractors begging for work. You know, or we could have to stay committed to using our own staff. But the point of starting immediately is important.
It's any, hold on, Nate.
I'm not against that idea, but just a reminder, we could double everyone's salary in the electrical area, our electrical department, and still be similar to the cost estimate for a contractor. So I like the idea of, trying something out, but, if it comes down to it and we need to raise those salaries a little bit, it may still be more cost effective over time.
I'd like to see the quotes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had a couple this year, right? So,
Next step.
Any other comments or questions?
What's the next step?
that's mine too. Next step.
Well, staff come up with a recommendation for us for the next step, what we should be doing. Good. Motion to adjourn?
Well, I'd like to thank.
Thank you to KL.
Yes,
I make a
thanks for
motion.
coming.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate it.
And a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Didn't we have,
K, which is L.
no, that's next, that's next.
Include one of those.
I saw something.
Okay.
Yes.